Welcome back to the deep dive. We have just pulled the lever on a really fascinating and, I have to say, challenging stack of sources today.
Definitely challenging.
Yeah, this material is coming to us straight from a 12-part Bible study series. It's all focused on salvation, and we are zeroing in specifically on part 3.
Right.
So, the core topic for our deep dive today is redemption. And our mission here is pretty tight. We really need to unpack how these sources define redemption.
What the mechanism is.
Exactly. What's the specific mechanism? What's the price of this transaction? And then, and I think this is the most important part, what are the profound everyday implications for you listening right now?
And, if we just cut straight to the core of it, the central definition from all this material is this. Redemption is a change of owner.
A change of owner.
It's a legal binding transaction that is paid for at a very specific and unique price.
I really want to dig into that specific choice of words, change of owner, because that immediately shifts the concept, doesn't it? It moves redemption away from just an abstract spiritual feeling and puts it squarely in the realm of like a legal reality.
It's a transfer of title.
It's an undeniable transfer of title. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right there. What are the moving parts in this change of ownership?
Well, the material lays out two essential components.
Yep.
And they have to happen at the same time.
Okay.
First, you have the fundamental act of purchase. This is where God acquires humanity.
A purchase.
A purchase, yes.
Yeah.
And the second component is the immediate result of that purchase, which is liberation. The Thomists say this acquisition specifically frees humanity from bondage to sin.
That phrase, bondage to sin, is so critical. For the listener who might not be deep in all the theological terms, how does the source material frame that? I mean, what was that previous state? Is it just being morally bad, or is it something more?
Oh, it's much more systemic than that. The idea of bondage, or, slavery, connects directly to the historical context of the word redemption.
A word itself.
The word itself, yeah.
Yeah.
In the ancient world, it was a commercial and legal term, plain and simple. If you were a slave, or maybe in some kind of overwhelming debt, redemption was the process where a third party would pay the price to set you free.
Right.
But here's the key. In setting you free, they actually purchased you out of that old state. So they changed your allegiance. They changed your owner.
So you're not just free, you belong to someone else now.
Precisely. In this theological framework, humanity was enslaved to sin and its consequences, and this purchase breaks that chain by transferring the ownership to the purchaser.
That makes the whole transaction feel so much more, urgent and legal. It's not some gift that just appeared out of thin air. It's a ransom paid to settle a debt. And this must be why the sources point to Romans 3.24, defining redemption as something that happens in Christ. The freedom isn't the starting point, is it? It's the result of being tied to the new owner.
That's it, exactly. And if you look at Ephesians 1.7, the sources also clarify the purpose of all this. They say this redemption is the actual reason, the legal basis for our forgiveness.
So you can't have one without the other.
You can't have the forgiveness without the purchase first. The debt absolutely has to be settled before the consequence can be taken away.
Okay, so we've established it's a transaction, it changes ownership, it secures liberation, but, any transaction requires a cost, a payment.
Of course.
So that naturally leads us to the how. What exactly was the currency required to execute this massive change of title?
The sources are, they're emphatic on this. They use this really powerful direct statement. You have been bought with a price.
A price.
And this wasn't cheap and it wasn't easily acquired.
No, not cheap at all. And the sources are very, very clear about what that price was. It wasn't land, it wasn't gold, it wasn't even, good deeds.
And that's the fascinating distinction here. The price that's specified, and it's all through the source material, is singular and it is absolute. The blood of Jesus Christ shed on the cross.
And they cite John 3.16 as the context for that.
As the ultimate context for that entire sacrificial payment, yes.
I feel like I have to push back a little here because this is where the theology can get really challenging for people. Does the source material give any reason why the payment had to be blood?
It does.
I mean, why is that the only acceptable currency? Does it talk about alternatives?
It absolutely addresses it. And this is where that whole legal framework of divine law comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
The sources explicitly point out why the common currency of the world, things like silver or gold, are just flat out rejected.
So they mention those specifically.
They do. One of the sources points to 1 Peter saying we were redeemed not with corruptible things like silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ.
Okay, but why are those things corruptible and therefore not good enough?
Because they're imperfect substitutes. According to this framework, redemption has to satisfy the divine consequence of sin. And the sources are stark about what that is. The soul that sins must die.
Right, a life for a life.
A life for a life. So the only way to satisfy that demand for life is with a life substitute. And the sources set up the mechanism through Leviticus, stating that the life of the flesh is in the blood.
And so without the shedding of blood, there is no remission.
There is no forgiveness of sin. The blood is the ultimate substitutionary payment. It settles the debt of death that the law required.
Wow. That connection it's powerful. It makes the transaction not just unique, but necessary. It wasn't some arbitrary choice. It was the required mechanism to satisfy the consequence.
Exactly.
And that ties right back to Colossians 1:14, reinforcing that this redemption is specifically and necessarily achieved through his blood.
And that's also the reason the sources mentioned the beneficiaries of this whole thing, the redeemed that are mentioned in Revelation. Because the price was so specific and so absolute, the act of redemption creates a very stark line.
A dividing line.
A dividing line. There are those who have been bought by this specific price, and then there are those who have not entered into that agreement.
The clarity on the mechanism, the how and the why the blood was the price, I think that's what really prepares us for this final section, and it is perhaps the most difficult one.
The practical application.
Yes, the practical application of this doctrine.
It's the pivot from a historical transaction to a present daily commitment.
Exactly. The material uses this really compelling transitional phrase. It says, that's where we get the concept of saying, I give my life to Christ.
It's the response.
It's the human response acknowledging the divine purchase.
And this is where the intellectual agreement, hits the rubber of real life. If redemption means being bought with that price, that whole question of ownership suddenly becomes a daily reality.
A moment-by-moment reality.
Yes. If Christ is the owner, then your life, your time, your resources, your decisions, they aren't truly your own anymore.
And the source material, it doesn't let the listener off the hook with just the simple statement of belief. It demands a genuine self-assessment. It turns the theological truth into a verifiable, practical test.
It really does.
They pose two incredibly direct and, frankly, uncomfortable questions. And we need to hold space for these questions, just like the material says.
The first core question is the simplest, but it's often the hardest to answer truthfully. Who is the owner of your life?
And it's not asking who you wish was the owner.
No. Who do you currently serve?
And then it immediately gets granular. It turns the philosophical into something you can measure. It asks this application question. How many hours of the day do you spend for the owner of your life?
That is a stunning way to frame it.
It's a stunning way to frame spiritual commitment, isn't it? Turning your daily time allocation into the ultimate test of faith.
You're basically turning your weekly calendar into a theological document. I mean, if you say you belong to Christ, but 90% of your discretionary time and energy, outside of just work and sleep, is spent on personal goals or entertainment or just material gain, the material forces you to confront that dissonance.
And that final test question.
The final test question is just, are you truly living for Jesus?
I find myself just pausing there because measuring faith commitment with a bank account or a calendar is incredibly intense. It just cuts straight through the polite veneer of, say, a Sunday morning commitment and asks about Tuesday at 3 p.m.
It does. And this is precisely why the source material includes a very pointed warning that we absolutely cannot gloss over.
What's the warning?
They specifically instruct a reader, don't rush to answer. And when you do, please don't deceive yourself.
Wow. That warning against self-deception, it implies that most people, when they hear this, will instinctively want to just claim the right answer, even if their actions don't match up. It acknowledges that huge gap between what we say we believe and where we actually spend our daily energy.
It does. This whole challenging approach is really intended to encourage critical thinking about whether the knowledge you just gained about the purchase price has actually translated into a genuine surrender of management rights.
The value of the purchase is reflected in how the asset is used.
Exactly. The asset being the redeemed life. You were bought with a price. Therefore, you are not your own. That's the logical conclusion the sources force you toward.
So if we pull back for a second and just synthesize the key knowledge from this deep dive, redemption, according to the study series, is fundamentally a transaction.
A transaction, yes.
And it results in a change of ownership. This transfer was made possible by a specific, very costly payment the shedding of Christ's blood, which secures both forgiveness and freedom from the bondage of sin.
It's a costly acquisition.
A very costly acquisition that, by its very definition, demands a complete hourly reorientation of your allegiance.
And I think the final thought we'd encourage you to mull over, coming right from those hard, reflective questions, is this. If redemption means you have been bought, who controls your time?
Right.
Who owns your resources? Are the hours you spend each week reinforcing the ownership you claim, or do they maybe tell a contradictory story?
A truly practical and tough challenge to end on. Thank you for joining us as we explored what it means to be bought with a price. We really encourage you to explore the implications of that radical transaction in your own life and continue the conversation. We'll see you next time as we dive into the next chapter of this essential series.